Hey, it's the latest with Lay. And the topic of today is, let's talk about this whole thing about modern women not desiring the average man anymore. Let's talk about it. So, just to break things down, lately on social media and different mediums within the media, I've been noticing there's been this narrative going on that, the modern woman, the young woman, middle-aged or so, are typically not going for or attracted to the average man. And so I found this interesting because it keeps repetitively being brought up. And so, the thing tends to be where the woman's mentioning, oh no, he's got to make at least 100 to 200 grand a year, and I want him to be tall and fit, and on and the list goes on about all these different attributes that are a requirement to even date men. And I was kind of taken aback by it because it seemed to be like a repetitive narrative that all different women are mentioning. And so as a woman, I wanted to speak on it and just give my take. Now, in order to make sure I'm representing both sides of the coin, because we like to talk about facts, and to make sure that we're equating both ends. So, both sides of the coin, we'll just make a mental note of, we'll say that heads represents these women's perspectives on all these different attributes above the average man. And then we'll say that tails is representing a perspective on the issues with that and opposing that perspective. And so, first off, let's start off with heads. We'll flip the mental coin, and it's on heads. So heads, let's talk about some of the reasoning maybe behind these women talking about wanting all these different attributes in a man, mentioning, I want him to make 200K, and I want him to be tall and handsome and, have all these different qualities. I can definitely admit as a woman that you are looking to be with a man that has ambition, that has plans for the future, that can provide stability, all these different things. So with that, I definitely can see where that's, pretty logical that these women are having a high standard for their mate. And so, they're thinking of cost of living. They're thinking about making sure that they're living a comfortable life or luxurious life in some cases. And so those are some of the affirmatives I can say in regards to their perspective, is them kind of shooting for the stars and wanting all of these things that will make up their so-called Prince Charming, if you will. So that is on the head side, the affirmative. Now let's check out the opposing, which is tails. On the tail side of the coin, I gotta say that there's lots of issues. There's lots of issues with this perspective, and there's lots of issues with this rhetoric being, spewed everywhere for our young women to be looking and, mirroring behavior after. First issue being is that a very small percentage of men in our country, I can definitely speak to accurately, very few percentage of the men in our country earn $100,000 or more a year. That's the first issue. So, when we're breaking down the fact that women already outnumber men in the population, and we're all aware of this, now if you add into that all of a sudden now it's a requirement to make over $100,000 a year, that's making the pot smaller and smaller. So the prospects of that become less and less likely to find a mate that you're going to be with. So that can be problematic. That can be an issue in the future. Also, with that said, unfortunately, there's a cause and there's an effect, right? There's always a cause and an effect. You guys will hear me say that quite often, because everything that you do has an effect and a consequence in some way, as well as your perspective. So the women that are out there with the perspective that they are only going to be with the man that makes 100K or more per year, you are more likely more and more likely to remain single. And it's one of those things where if you do plan to ever find a mate and someone to build a life with, when you are having those sort of standards, those are on your own personal standards, and you're well within your right to have those standards. But the fact of the matter is you're going to be more and more likely to be single later and later into your adulthood. And that can pose some issues and come with a lot of negative feelings of loneliness as a result. Also, we got to keep in mind that this is one of those things where majority of the men in the population are going to be feeling excluded from the dating pool. And, if we're feeding this to our younger generation of women, this can become a thing where there's just lots less of unity being made and unions being made and marriages and kids and all those different things, because the standard has become aimed at the top 10%, and it's like, the heck with the other 90%. The heck with the other 90% of men. I just want to ask, I have a question. Just a little pop quiz for everyone. Whatever happened to women loving a man in uniform? You guys remember that? Do you guys remember when it was like a really big thing? It was a fad, but it was a long-lasting, like decades-long fad. I remember, like, ever since I was younger, and even generations before me, that women would always say, oh, I just love a man in uniform, right? A man in uniform being what? Most of those different services, like a firefighter or a police officer, and things of that sort. A little bit more of the medium level salaried men, military, right? All these different areas that I'm mentioning, these men on average do not make 100K or more. They're making maybe like 60 to 75, right? And then as they work their way up, they may reach 100 or more, but that depends. And it's going to also be less and less likely the higher the salary is. So I'm just wondering where that went. What happened to loving a man in uniform? Because that man in uniform typically was making, a median of, 60K. And that was cool. Now all of a sudden, that's not good enough. And so I'm just wondering where that's coming from. Are we considering the benefits that come with a lot of these jobs where men are making 50 and 60K? There's lots of benefit packages associated. There's, paid vacation and retirement and a lot of stability-based things that are valuable that I think should be considered when a woman is picking her mate and she's worried about financial stability and future planning. Those things should be taken in consideration. That those men in uniform could be considered stabilizers as well in the household. So I'm going to do a quick story time, and I'm going to give a quick anecdote about a good friend of mine's aunt. So a good friend of mine, she has been telling me about this aunt that she has that is like very, very alone and lonely. And so she like goes and visits her aunt, on a weekly basis, because her aunt is 65 years old. She is single, has been single for like over a decade now. She lives alone, and her aunt is actually very, I would say she isn't very happy, just to say it plainly. And so she checks on her aunt because her aunt is worried about essentially dying alone. And that's a big worry of her aunt. And it's become a big worry of my good friend, is that there's no one there in the household with her aunt to look after her and make sure that things are okay in the household. And so I just caution, because my friend let me know that her aunt was a good looking lady, especially in her day. And she used to have a lot of male callers, a lot of men that were after her, but her aunt was very picky, very, very picky. And so, moral to the story is, don't nitpick your way into dying alone. Don't do that. Message. Well, this has been a Latest with Lay. and I am signing off.